Futurama comic, issue 35. Zoidberg's dressed like a superhero, and he's told they're looking for someone good in their superhero team instead, even though he has claws, and can squirt ink when he's nervous. And he can eat just about anything. He tells them to pretend to be mugging Leela, and because he calls her pretty, he flatters her into giving him a chance. And when he somehow uses his claws against the wrong person when he was looking at Fry, they naturally see him as more of a liability because he's clumsy and ignore him. Then it turns out it was all just a bad dream of Bender's. Hey, why are robots programmed to be able to dream anyways? It makes sense for organics, I guess, but it doesn't seem to benefit robots. Fry shakes him to wake him up, and he tells him to keep shaking him because he was making a martini. Bender says he was remembering the superhero episode, and shows off a new flash memory card in his head that helps him count cards. Fry says he wishes he could remember more of that episode, but the tube of miracle cream that gave them their powers conveniently had memory loss as a side effect. It sure is inconvenient that the memory loss always purely covered the amount of time they had superpowers. It makes sense if it was made by an alien witch instead of making no sense. Bender says he could project the memory of the new Justice team on the wall for him, so we'd see Clamps applying for their team even though they all know he'll hurt anyone at a moment's notice. He does have a useful power, but they'd have to reprogram him to never hurt them, or anyone good who didn't deserve it. And since he's clearly defective, that wouldn't be bad, it'd be fixing a broken machine. But no, they're too stupid to think it was right to ask Farnsworth, or too stupid to think of that. They could reprogram him in his sleep, so it doesn't even matter if he says no. Fry welcomes him anyways, and somehow the robot thought he was applying for the Robot Injustice Society, even though they don't look like evil robots. So he'd just immediately leave. Impossible stupidity is the thing that's common in stupid kids' cartoons for jokes like SpongeBob. So why is it so common here? It's almost never funny, and it takes no effort to write, and adults watching the show would be smart enough to know that. Farnsworth says that having the base of the Robot Injustice Society in the neighborhood keeps the rent down by creeping people out, which is a creative way to see the bright side of this. Still, you'd think the police would have come to that base. Then they have to deal with the ridiculous supervillain that wouldn't exist. Now I'm bored. Anyways, they overload us with dialogue. Like every time. Gee, I wonder if they'll win. Is there anything actually interesting here and not stuff that was done a million times? Well, Hermes tells him that new supervillains are required by law to say their secret origins. There's no reason they'd follow the law. He's the son of an impossibly stupid, ridiculous supervillain. He finally shuts up after saying he put 5 tiny suns around the Earth to create permanent daylight that immediately kill everybody. So yeah, typical nonsense because it doesn't. All to imitate superhero fiction when it doesn't have to. But the superhero stuff is a welcome change up from the status quo, to an extent. At least it's interesting that they get attacked by owls because the daylight at night freaks them out. It's impressive that a writer who doesn't care about making sense cared enough to write that. Nixon frustrates me by reminding me of people that don't believe in global warming, and they definitely deserve to get parodied by him saying it. But he's still impossibly stupid. Even if he is from 1,000 years ago, literally nobody would want to say that at this point. Bender says he'll sit this one out, but gets convinced otherwise because he's told that when they save the world, people would want his face on their beer bottles. So then they go back to bite the bad guy with no personality. And somehow Fry hallucinates that everyone around him is a bunch of food, and the bad guy says they're hilarious, so we'll let them survive the longest. Fry thanks him as a result. And a few days later, a reporter says that citizens are being asked to help shelter a homeless fish because of the lakes being gone. This is interesting, but still too stupid. It's been days since the heroes were able to take a shower, and the bathtub's too full of fish for Bender to make gin with it. Hermes is being attacked by an octopus. And the heroes know where the bad guy's base is. Of course it's on the surface of the sun, where it'd get destroyed by gravity even if it could magically withstand the heat. Farnsworth says he's made a portable air conditioner that protects everyone around it with a coldness bubble. That doesn't solve the gravity problem of the sun. Leela explains that their anti-gravity boots let them walk on the surface of the sun. As I wonder how it took so long for Farnsworth to make this thing when it's the 31st century. Somehow Fry decides to step outside the circle of coldness to try to warm up, even though he can see where he is. He turns to Ash, and Leela cries, and Bender puts his hand on her shoulder and tries to reassure her. Then Fry comes back to life, realistically without clothes on because the Miracle Cream healing factor saved him. I wish they explained that the Miracle Cream was made of nanobots, at least that would kind of justify it. And Bender offers to give him a costume out of his chest. They go into the base, which is conveniently climate controlled. I'd expect a supervillain like they're dealing with to be magically immune to heat, because he's not following any logic, so he's magical. Somehow Leela thinks he won't be expecting them. Why can't Fry have all of the impossibly stupid dialogue and save everyone else's dignity? They have to deal with the bad guys' guards, who are based on sunspawns. One of them tells the heroes freeze, and the other distracts him into staying still by saying that's ironic that they said freeze. While they were talking, the bad guy caught the heroes himself. I wish I saw that, because that sounds important. It's funny that he called them out on it and said they're both fired. All they do is talk about the pun. But it's funny because they don't have facial expressions, and yet they're still talking like regular people. Still, it's another moment of people being impossibly stupid because they had no reason not to care about their jobs. The heroes wake up tied to a reverse sundial because he's gonna try to kill them with a slow death trap like a moron, when shooting them and waiting for them to die would be just as much of a slow death trap and be guaranteed to work. This kind of genre is just made of nonsensical cliches. I mean, if he wants them to die slowly, why isn't he punching them himself the whole time? Like, you'd think he would find that a lot more satisfying as a sadist than just walking away when they're in a death trap. Speaking of that, he also leaves them unsupervised, like the James Bond villains. Or at least he's planning to, because Leela creatively stops him from leaving to ask him if he's afraid of the dark. He says he is, even though he's talking to his enemies, because his father never let him face the dark. The heroes decide to try to convince him that the dark isn't so bad. Leela says it's peaceful and soothing at night. But that's dumb because you're more likely to get mugged at night. You don't really need to be in the dark to find it peaceful and soothing. He says that the most sleep he could get as a kid was an hour because of the dozens of lights on, and it makes him cranky and evil. At least that explains it. But I'm forced to assume that the reason he survives that little sleep is that he's an alien. Even then, it's hard to believe that any species could survive just an hour of sleep every night. Fry says that at night, girls are more likely to kiss you because they can't see you very well. But it clearly wouldn't matter what time of the day it is. What matters is the lighting of the room itself. He says he always wanted a girlfriend, when obviously if the girl wouldn't have kissed him if she knew what he looked like, a relationship starting from being in the dark would end the minute she was in the light anyways, so why bother? Bender says night's the best time to steal stuff, so he wonders if he's been wrong about the dark. So he starts a disco and frees the heroes off screen, and thanks them for letting him know that nighttime is awesome. You'd think if he hated not being able to sleep for long enough, then he definitely wouldn't grow up hating the dark, because he grew up with his dad vilifying the dark, so he would look forward to getting to sleep in the dark his whole life, because then he would get to sleep long enough. Fry thanks him for not killing them, and Bender thanks him for inviting them to the new nightclub he was probably only allowed to operate under the condition that he stopped being evil, while police were under the assumption that he was impossible to arrest and keep in jail. I wish that was explained as why Mammoth Mogul was allowed to open his casino. He explains that he bought the nightclub with his dad's crime money from the fortress. I love that it explained how he got this. And the sunspots say it's ironic that they're called bouncers, and when the projected story ends, we see Fry and Bender fighting bank robbers in a superhero video game they apparently had of themselves, that Farnsworth could have made, just to be told to scrub the ship. And suddenly it turns out they have a ship scrubbing game, and the story ends with them being told to actually scrub the ship. That made me smile because it was so unexpectedly silly. Farnsworth definitely made that game. Futurama Comic, Issue 36. Bender shows Fry that a robot parrot isn't dead, he just has to flip a switch on his back. I wonder if this will be useful information to them. They need to get robot parrots to the planet New England by intergalactic noon. Amy lampshades that some of the workers at Planet Express don't usually get to go on exciting adventures. My time's wasted, and after Leela says there's magically a planet with oceans of clam chowder, as if the planet of supermodels wasn't crazy enough, she says New England was bounded by robots who rebelled against their British masters. They deliver the parrots, and a robot walks silly and tightens a bolt on himself to fix it. The robot wants a book robot to take these parrots to the aviary, and he speaks in Spanish, not understanding him, and wishes he paid for his translation program. Fry says he had the same problem when he accidentally bought a Spanish version of World of Warcraft, and for no reason he's told off for talking about Warcraft. I like how much this story is taking advantage of the civilians being robots in creative ways instead of them being robots just to cause the heroes trouble. This is more interesting than how Sonic Boom's Robots in the Sky handled their robot city, where they sort of might as well have been regular people who were just affected by a brainwashing ray. Here, we see a robot lying down near a holographic police tape that had her memory erased by Jack the Ripper. Leela's not allowed to go to her ship to leave because this place is a crime scene. Amy wants to go on an adventure too, and Hermes says that he does have 1 day scheduled for Terrible Judgment this year and was going to go shark boxing. He wants to go as long as Zoidberg gets in danger. Amy says that since they don't have a spaceship right now, they can explore the sewers. And Hermes warns them to be quiet so they won't get caught. Too bad the writer was too lazy to show us how they did get caught, and instead cut ahead to them being tied up and threatened with getting flushed to the sub-levels of the sewers. The mutants are real jerks here for doing this, worse than their oppressors. Why didn't they have ray guns when they went down to the sewers? They get flushed eventually, and Fry's at a tower getting a tour. He's told that Henry VIII Terabytes had his wives' heads removed, but it didn't kill them, so we see someone holding a plate with them as they nag him. But if he doesn't like them, why does he keep them around? Leela's watching the changing of the virus protection, and she tells Bender over the phone to come over here because there was another victim of Jack. So he says he's gonna help everyone solve this mystery to get a reward because he's confident. It turns out that in the sub-levels of the sewers, somehow the people look good, the humans anyways. And they're nice to the protagonists and are happy to help them. They get fed the best food they ever tasted and get to wear comfortable clothes, and someone hopes they'll stay a long time. Why did the mutants think this would be a punishment? Bender steals the clue book from a detective and says that Jack's called the Ripper because he used to be a CD ripping and copying robot, and no one knows what caused him to go crazy, because the writer is too lazy to pick a reason, and none of them made sense anyways. The detective bot takes back his clue book, and when Bender is told that the cops here don't have guns, he easily goes on a stealing spree as they desperately chase after him. Hermes asks who's the leader of Perfectia, and gets told that they don't have one, and somehow no one here considers himself better than everyone else. Someone's somehow open-minded enough to ask which one of them should be their leader, even though their society supposedly works without one. And the three argue, and all get made the leader. This has reminded me of that story where Antoine was served on hand and foot, just like a king, just to be cooked in a cauldron, because they're being suspiciously nice to them. Leela says the victims all seem to be the same size, and since she's told it's none of her business what they do with the victims after this, she decides to follow that ambulance. So Fry and Leela ride on Bender while he's being dragged along by the ambulance holding onto it. They find out that all of the victims go missing before they could be examined. You'd think somebody would have had a camera at the scene of the crime. Fry's told to gather the entire planet in one place and succeeds an hour later because they're all too polite to say no. Which can only possibly make sense because they're all robots. Bender says he gathered them all here because he was hoping that Jack would confess. For no reason. So they get mad at him and want to go after them because he said football is called soccer. Hermes is responsible enough to learn more about the culture, so he reads a book and finds out that the people fled the surface world because it was so disgusting and stupid to them. And they're all such snobs that they evolved into a society based on biting sarcasm. So all of the nice things they said about them were sarcastic. There is no foreshadowing to this. I thought the protagonists would be put in danger and have to escape. At least this is a twist. Maybe they were being sarcastic when they said they didn't have a leader either. Then there's another victim and Jack's gotten away, and Leela says that Jack's right here. Bender says amusingly, "He's invisible?" and screams and looks back and forth. I guess Leela thinks the bad guy is the detective bot because he's always right there when the victims show up, conveniently. Leela says to just leave the victim here and comes to the conclusion out of nowhere that she's just resting. And then she gets up and suddenly looks different, and confesses that she's Jack. This actually makes sense because there's a theory that Jack the Ripper was actually a woman and got away with it because nobody suspected her, since she was a woman in old times. Leela says that using disguises, she'd delete her memory, but always backed up her data files. After a while, a timer would go off and she'd automatically reboot her memory. This takes advantage of them all being robots as well. She insured all of her fake identities with policies that paid extra when you're the victim of a serial delete. So she got famous, and she somehow thinks she can get away with taking the insurance money to open a theme park when she should know she's around cops. So she gets arrested. The crew bring home souvenirs, and Bender got followed by some cops he thought were souvenirs because they didn't look like people, and gets attacked for all the things he took. This was a very nonsensical story about a forgotten adventure where Fry's friends still had superpowers. Obviously it would have ended right when the bad guys surrounded the planets with suns, because everyone would have immediately died. In fact, the bad guy wouldn't have even done that because he would know that it would kill him too. But it was interesting seeing the consequences of the planet being hotter and not having night. And I liked that the heroes could walk on the surface of the sun with their anti-gravity boots, even if it's not explained how a base can survive its gravity, or any one. And I love that instead of the heroes magically escaping the death trap with Deus Ex Machinas, the story is creative because they managed to talk the bad guy into not hating the Dark Knight anymore with reason. Even if Bender was the only one who had a really good reason. After a constant parade of characters being impossibly stupid, it was refreshing to see one that listened to reason. So it wasn't irredeemable. But I'm just cynical about superhero fiction because it's overdone and doesn't even try to make sense. It's mainly the existence of superpowered supervillains that I hate and can't take seriously. I read a lot of those action comics of Superman where he was fighting mundane bad guys that real people would have to deal with. And I loved seeing him deal with them. It actually worked as something you could be immersed in. Because the bad guys were unlikable, I didn't mind seeing him have no challenge in dealing with them since it was already Superman. So I didn't need the story to lie to me that he'd have a challenge and a chance of losing. I stopped reading the comic the second I saw Lex Luthor, and I don't like seeing the bad guys be as powerful as that. It makes the world seem a bit too unfair, because it's supposed to be uplifting that there's a superhero around. But then the fact that there's supervillains too kind of brings that all the way back down. This story was about the crew going to a robot-filled planet New England where Leela solves the mystery of Jack the Ripper. It does a great job taking advantage of them all being robots, complete with the supposed deleter being Jack herself, who poses the new victim every time. Meanwhile, Amy and her friends want adventure too, so they go to the sewers and get flushed down to a city of sarcastic snobs, who are predictably only pretending to like them as a prank. It's underwhelming that they didn't get in danger and have to run away or fight their way out of it. But since Zoidberg's the only one who could fight, that was mandatory to not require them to get rescued. And it makes sense that they don't get to go on adventures as much because they're all normal people, and the crew doesn't like Zoidberg anyway.